Today on another edition of Seahawks Forever, powered by BetUS. If you're a Seahawk fan of any kind, you know who Brian Nemhauser is. HawkBlogger, Real Hawk Talk, and now HawkBlogger Mornings, and he's actually a credentialed member of the media for the first time. That means he gets to be at practice, on the sideline, interviewing coaches and players. He joined us today to give some insight into what he's seeing so far. We'll talk a little bit about the scrimmage on Saturday, as well as today's practice. Some breaking news we'll get his thoughts on. He gives us a couple of sleeper, under-the-radar names of players to watch for that might have an outside shot to make this roster. We'll get his thoughts on Geno Smith's return to the practice field and what the heck is going on that offensive line. Brian Nemhauser joins me next.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Be sure to hit that thumbs up and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit the bell so you get notification of future episodes. I'm on all the audio platforms as well, so be sure to subscribe there. And if you like what you hear, leave a rating or a review. And as always, I will put all the other ways to support the show down in the description. Thanks again to BetUS for sponsoring this program. They are offering a 125% sign-up bonus for your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Thank you to those guys. So Brian's been on the show before, and but it's been a while. Some time has gone by, and a lot has changed, as I mentioned in the intro. And without going into it at length here, and I asked Brian about it to start the interview, he made a life decision over the last year to focus full time on creating content and covering the Seahawks and walking away from a very successful career. He wrote very eloquently at length on his blog, on his personal blog a couple of days ago about that. Check my timeline, go back a little ways before the scrimmage on Saturday. I reposted that if you want to check that out. But let's get into it. Brian Nemhauser with his thoughts on what he's seeing from the Seahawks so far in training camp. Brian, thanks for joining me. It's been a minute, and since the last time I talked to you, there's been quite a few changes. I know your time is limited today, but I wanted to give the viewers a little bit of an update. How has your role in what you do, creating content, and the things you do at HawkBlogger changed in the last few months?
Well, first off, Dan, it's good to see you, man. It's been a little while, and happy to be on with you. It's been a really cool kind of shift. I started creating HawkBlogger Mornings, which is daily morning Seahawks content, 7 days a week, kind of insane. And
yeah,
it was something I thought I'd get tired of. It was like before the draft. I didn't, and other people seem to enjoy watching it. And so, over 100,000 people in the first 60 to 90 days tuned in. And, it's been a lot of fun. I've been building a fun community over there. And then I, reached out to the Seahawks about, really going full time on covering the team, this year, really leaving the tech industry after a lot of time there. And, was kind of shocked that they were like, cool, you're creating great stuff. We'd love to have you, and let's see how it goes. So I now have credentials, which I was never sure that would ever happen. And been covering the team, pretty much a daily, multiple times a day, and just obsessing about it. So it's been a lot of fun.
And you can tell, and you're doing some great stuff. Love following it. And I also imagine that the best part about going to training camp practice for you now is you get to drive your car and park in the parking lot. You don't have to take the shuttle anymore.
You'd think that. I am not yet worthy of a parking pass at the
Really?
VMAC.
Okay.
But
maybe that's the next step.
I do get to ride my bike. So it's it's about a 10-mile ride each way, and that's been nice. Give me a little exercise on the way down there.
So you get a whole different perspective now. You get to be up close on the sideline watching all these training camp practices. And you were there Saturday for the scrimmage. I want to get some of your takeaways from that, because you had some really interesting takes on a couple players at the bottom of the roster that I want to talk about. But first up is this. My initial impression Saturday coming away, and it seems to be a consistent theme the last couple of weeks from what others have reported as well, including yourself. The defensive line has been a dominant force, and at times the defense as a whole. That certainly was the case on Saturday. Not a lot of movement, trying to get the ball up and down the field with Sam Howell leading the first team offense. And that naturally leads to questions about the offensive line. We're going to talk about that. But how do you reconcile those two things when you're watching it and put into perspective for me how dominant you feel like the defensive line, how well they've played versus how that relates to concerns about the offensive line? How do you put those two things together?
Well, I mean, I'm not quite sure I'd go to say as far as to say the defensive line's been dominant. I think it's had a very good camp. I think that there's a ton of depth, a lot of talent there. They can play multiple positions, and that's been really good to see. But, I've watched 1v1s since pads have been coming on, and there's been at least as many days where the offensive line shuts out the defensive line as vice versa. So I wouldn't necessarily jump all the way to like that they're dominating. I think one of the places where the offensive line's struggling is run blocking. I think that takes the longest often to come together, especially when there's some new players. That's running game, as you know, is a very coordinated type of blocking. It's different than pass pro. And I think the pass pro in general has been pretty good. Although in the last couple of days, including the scrimmage day, Mike Macdonald's been heating it up. He's been bringing the corners off the edges on blitzes, and they're getting home quite a bit. And that's not always the offensive line. That can be the running backs. That can be the tight ends. And so it does muddy up the picture a little bit. But, I would give the offensive line a C plus B minus for camp so far. And I give the defensive line like a B plus. So I don't know that it's quite as disparate as maybe it sounds like maybe you think it is.
That sound you hear is the sound of everyone watching this exhaling, right? And just because I think it's just part and parcel of being a Seahawk fan the last 4 or 5 years is you're nervous about the offensive line, and you look to that as a source of how good you think the team's going to be, to simplify it as much as I can. Continuity is such an important factor up front in getting those guys to play together and achieve, the type of efficiency you're talking about. And that seems to be something that's a little bit in flux. News today that Connor Williams may be getting closer to signing with the Seahawks potentially. Right before that news broke, Mike Macdonald himself said the center competition was open between Oluwatimi and Nick Harris. We've seen McClendon Curtis playing just as much right tackle recently as George Fant. Some of that may just be veteran kind of load management stuff. How close do you think the coaching staff is to deciding on who their 5 is going to be?
I don't think they're that close. Talking to Mike Macdonald today, he's pretty non-committal about when they need to make that decision, and seems to feel like they're not particularly close to making that decision. And I would say that the right tackle I wouldn't worry about. That's George Fant's job, and they're just going to give him vet time off as much as possible. And then, McClendon Curtis is getting reps because he's right now, Dan, I think McClendon Curtis is one of their 5 best O linemen. And so it would not surprise me if, when all is said and done for the training camp portion, for the preseason portion, if McClendon Curtis is back at right guard as a starter next to George Fant. And that's where I think there's conversation. And then the center position, as you know, is also, they're rotating Nick Harris and Oluwatimi. Oluwatimi had a much better day today than he's had previously. Had some good reps against Byron Murphy. But it's been disappointing. The center position has been disappointing. It looks not catastrophically bad, but it looks like below average starter quality.
Which would obviously explain the interest in Williams. If what you say about Curtis is pretty dynamic, might that explain why we've seen a lot more of the last couple of weeks Christian Haynes getting some reps at left guard?
Well, as far as I've seen, he's only done that in one practice during Laken Tomlinson getting a vet day, and he did well for what it's worth. And I talked to Christian about getting reps over there, and that the coaches kind of challenged him to do it. And, he felt good about it. So I think he can do it. I thought Christian had been having some better days the last, 4 or 5 or so. Today wasn't a great day for Christian Haynes. I thought he gave up some quick pressure. He really struggled in 1v1s. He got kind of embarrassed by Miles Adams today a couple times. So I don't know. I thought he was really charging towards Anthony Bradford. Today was, I think, a little bit of a setback, but we're going to see once the games start. Offensive line has a way of sorting itself out once you start facing guys that aren't on your team.
Yeah, which they will do Saturday against the Chargers. Other big news today, Geno Smith on the field and seemingly no restrictions, looked 100% healthy anyway, according to everyone who was there. How do you look to you?
Yeah, he looked great. He actually did more than I expected him to. Took all the snaps he would normally take. He scrambled, which I was like, come on. And like, there was one play where he scrambled toward the sideline, and I think it was Tyrell Dodson was in close pursuit. And I'm like, guys, like, bring it down. Bring it down, because I got to tell you, Dan, if Geno goes down, this is going to be rough for a while. It is not a viable quarterback situation without Geno Smith. And on the flip side, if Geno's in, I think it could be pretty fun. So it's a going from fun to non-viable is a big gap. And so, yeah, I think they're going to need to take care of him, but he looked fine today. Maybe a little bit rusty, but generally healthy.
Michael Vick at BetUS.com. Catch an incredible 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits, plus 10% gambler's insurance. BetUS, my online sportsbook and casino.
You were pretty hard on Sam Howell for his performance Saturday. As I said, the ones didn't really move the ball well. There was a lot of pressure that they were facing. There was the one drive that you highlighted that I had in my notes as well, where it was a 3 and out, and on back-to-back, all 3 plays, there was pressure in the backfield that affected the play. I think it was Devin Witherspoon on the first play. Mike Morris got some pressure on the second play, and then Leonard Williams blew up a play. So let me ask it to you this way. It's pretty clear the gap between Geno Smith and Sam Howell, and has been since the start of training camp. How would you compare what you see from Sam Howell in training camp this year to what you saw from Drew Lock when he backed up Geno?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been as outspoken in being a critic of Drew Lock as maybe anybody. I never thought Drew Lock was a starter in the making, and was really concerned that it seemed like the Seahawks thought he was.
Mm-hmm.
And then spent the offseason kind of trying to recruit him back. Even the new coaches talked more about Drew Lock than they did about Geno Smith in the offseason.
Yeah.
But if I'm being honest, Drew Lock would be doing better than Sam Howell right now. I don't think it would be particularly close. Drew Lock's issue is that his processing, his decision-making is just flawed. And ultimately he will make mistakes. He's like a Jimmy Garoppolo type of player that will just always be good for a turnover in a game. And that's just not a way that you can win in the NFL. But he also got NFL talent. He's got an NFL arm. He's got NFL size, mobility. Sam Howell doesn't have all of those things. He's played like a short quarterback in this camp. And at times it's really affected his ability to play from the pocket and be accurate and throw it over guys. Mike Morris is tall. Leonard Williams is tall. These guys are making it hard on him. And he's gotten better, but yeah, it's been pretty hard to watch. So Mike McDonald was pretty clear and pretty transparent about that the last couple of days, especially this morning on his interview with Brock and Salk. So I think the team understands what they've got there right now.
The Seahawks have never, at least since John Schneider's run things, have never really devoted a third spot on the 53-man roster to a quarterback. They just haven't. They've always had a guy in the practice squad, but even that player was typically someone that just never appeared to have starter upside, the Jake Lutons of the world, right? Do you think because of what you're talking about, and that maybe some of the concerns with Howell's performance, if Geno should go down, that this might be a year that they do that?
I would be surprised because, I mean, I think the emergency third quarterback rule gives them some flexibility. And so I think, I do expect PJ Walker to be a guy that they keep around. I think PJ Walker has done well enough to make them feel like, let's have two instead of one behind Geno Smith. And I do think that they would go to Sam Howell if Geno is down. But if it was an extended period of time, I think that it would end up being PJ Walker, at least the way things have looked so far. I think he probably would give the team a better chance to win. And that's not saying that PJ Walker has lit it up, but Sam Howell right now has been disappointing. I was a pretty big proponent of that trade. I thought they gave up the right amount to get a very young quarterback that's had 18 starts in the NFL and made a lot of big time throws. And I was in play in Seattle last year, as was John Schneider. I think he will come alive in the games a little bit more. It's a little bit more improvisational. I think he can play off script, but it's concerning to see him struggle to function within the structure of the offense. I just don't know that that's the type of quarterback that you can really excel with on any consistent kind of basis.
All right, enough about the offense. Let's talk about the defense, because you highlighted a guy in your notes this weekend that I've been a fan of for a year and a half, even going back to before the draft last year. And that's Mike Morris, who you've already name dropped, and a guy that unfortunately had to miss his whole rookie season with an injury. He consistently seems to be someone who flashes in practice, and he certainly did in the scrimmage on Saturday. What is it that makes him stand out?
Well, I mean, I just actually talked to him today, and it was a great conversation. And he's a guy that has really been trying to gain confidence back in his body physically, and, as in his words, like, get the swag back that he had when he was at Michigan, and just playing with that level of confidence. The last, 2 or 3 practices, he has been coming on strong. And one of the things that's really nice about Mike Morris is, even when he's not collapsing the pocket, which, by the way, he's done a lot more the last few practices, he is so tall. He's like the tallest defensive lineman on the team. I think he's 6'6". He raises his arms up regularly. He knows how to use it. I talked to him about it. He likes, he said he's not going to come up with a Matumbo finger wag or anything, but he's been knocking down a lot of passes, and they've been playing him a lot on the edge and on the inside. He's effective in both cases. I've seen him split and beat double teams. I see him just push the pocket. I think he's a weapon for them that I was hoping he would be. It sounds like you too, but it was a slow start to camp. So he and Byron Murphy, I feel like, started slow, have been picking up steam, and 2 young guys on that line that have a lot of promise.
And then another kid that you highlighted that really came as a surprise to me is D. Williams, undrafted free agent out of Tennessee, a guy who has wide receiver and cornerback experience in his background, but was thought to be primarily signed as an option in the return game because he was so dynamic there at Tennessee. He's been focusing on corner, and you've actually made a case that he might have a shot to make the roster at that spot. What have you seen from Williams?
Yeah, he's one of those guys where, you go to camp, and I know you've been there before, Dan, and there's so much going on. Your eyes are everywhere. There's definitely like a huge checklist of things you're wanting to see, guys that you already know, draft picks, all this other stuff. And then invariably there's always a guy or 2 or 3 that just keeps, getting your attention, and you're like, I'm not going to pay attention to that guy now. And the 3rd, 4th time you're like, well, I should probably start paying attention. D. Williams is that guy in the defensive backfield. I haven't seen him have a really bad rep in coverage yet. I think that I kind of ignored it because I figured, like, oh, they're just experimenting. There's nothing there. But I think he's played pretty well back there. I think that they really like his return skills. I think that's the only reason they brought him in the first place. And realistically, his likely outcome is the practice squad. I think that's realistic. but there is an outside chance that they like his return skills enough that they want to find a way to have him on the roster. And that could mean that they decide to move some other guys. They've got some other veterans there. They could choose to, like Mike Jackson's a name. They could choose to move somewhere else. Maybe that opens up a spot. Maybe they keep an extra corner. I don't think it's crazy, but I think it's, probably 30% chance or less, but that's 30% more than I would have guessed at the start of camp.
I know you don't have a lot of time. I got to let you go, but one last question. As we look ahead to the preseason game against the Chargers, kind of that concept you just touched on where someone always catches your eye. That happens a lot in the preseason games, especially if you're watching on TV. You're just kind of taking everything in and then someone just keeps making plays. Last year at times I thought Patrick O'Connell was that guy. Just kept making tackles, was always around the ball, right? Who's another name or two that you think might possibly do that on Saturday?
Yeah, there's a few. Hayden Hatton has the undrafted free agent receiver, has had a nice camp, has great hands, has been a common target. I think he'll show up. Aesop Winston Jr. has had a really nice camp, number 13. A lot of the players say he has the best hands on the team. He's had a nice camp. He's also been being used as a returner.
Right.
Two guys that, you have to be a little hardcore to really pay attention to, but Mike Jarrell and Garrett Greenfield. Jarrell, right tackle out of Findlay, 6th round pick. And Garrett Greenfield, one of the most sought after undrafted free agents who set the combine record for highest, vertical leap at 38 inches. A guy over 300 pounds. Both of them have had really nice camps. Jarrell especially. Jarrell, I think there's a very good chance he makes the roster. And I think that he's had some pretty impressive reps. So to those two guys, I would watch their play. And I think folks will be excited. Obviously, the running backs, George Halani, Kobe Lewis. These are two guys that I think people will like to watch as well. But I'm trying to name maybe some less likely folks.
Halani's interesting. He's a guy that Corbin Smith talked about again today. I guess he had a play near the end of practice today that was pretty impressive. I didn't think the separation between he and Kenny McIntosh looked very wide on Saturday, at least physically. Like he looks every bit the athlete that McIntosh is kind of built like him as well. So that'll always be fun to watch. You always get a better chance to gauge those skill possession guys in the preseason game. It's kind of set up for those guys. Well, listen, Brian, congratulations on everything that's happening with the show and getting to be a credentialed member of the media now. Good luck with that. We'll be following along with that, and I would love to get you back on sometime during the season. Get your thoughts on how things are going in the first Mike McDonald year.
Absolutely, Dan. Man, I appreciate you having me on.
Anytime. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
You can always tell who got in on Twitter in the early days because of how simple and straightforward their handles are. At Seahawks Forever, if you want to follow me on Twitter, and if you want to follow Brian, at HawkBlogger. That's just the way it was. Appreciate him coming on and sharing his insights with us again. Who are you looking for when the Seahawks play the Chargers? Who do you want to see perform maybe in the second half when a lot of those second, third teamers get some run? Who are some of the under the radar guys that you are really excited to see in a formal game setting on Saturday against the Chargers? Of course, later in the week, I will more formally preview that game. Shout out again to BetUS for sponsoring this program. Really appreciate them and their support. For your support, again, check the description. All the different ways that you can support me and the channel will be down there. And in the meantime, just be sure to hit subscribe on that YouTube page, thumbs up, bell notification, all that stuff. Until next time, thanks for watching. Forever and always, go Hawks.